Well, this week's original video fell through, so I needed a quick replacement. And I had this footage of me testing some old laptops, so enjoy, I guess. These are two HP Pavilion laptops from the mid to late 2000s. The one on the right is an HP Pavilion DV5000. I bought it knowing that it was working and I had a general idea of what the hardware was, and it was around $20. I bought it for a project that's for a side thing, not actually for anything that's going on YouTube. The other computer is a DV6000, which was almost $40 and is untested. So I don't know if it works or what hardware it has, because the person who I bought it from didn't have a power adapter for it. These are notorious for overheating and frying themselves, so what I did is a pretty stupid idea, but I got sucked in because it's actually a special edition HP, so it's got a fancier color scheme going on. We're going to start with the more boring one of the two, the DV5000. I bought this knowing it would work, and it's not completely unknown to me since I have a DV4000 that's similar. It's in okay condition, but it's pretty dirty and there's a lot of wear on the keyboard, and the hardware isn't exactly impressive. This is a Core Solo T1350 device. It also has 512 megs of RAM. It's missing the hard drive entirely, and it has a DVD-ROM drive. It also still has its original battery, amazingly. The RAM and optical drives had mid-2006 date codes on them, so I'm going to assume roughly that's when this was manufactured. But that's about all that I can access on the bottom. Anyway, plugging the system in, the battery appears to take a charge, which is not something I was expecting, given that I didn't even know that it had a battery in it. And, big shock, it works just fine. Although the screen is really dim. The backlight has clearly seen better days. The CMOS battery is also dead, so there's pretty much no settings here that were customized, and this BIOS is really basic anyway. So without any hard drive to explore, I popped in Hirad's boot CD, as I always do, to make sure that optical drive worked, and yep, it booted just fine. So before I did a lot else, I wanted to clean this thing just because it was pretty dirty. This thing, I think, was sitting around for a while, so that makes sense. And then I popped in a hard drive. This is a Seagate 100GB 7200 RPM drive that has just kind of been sitting around. I used it in a couple older videos, and it can find a home in here. But anyway, for the time being, I decided to install just Windows XP on this system, exactly what I did with the D600. What I noticed is that it was loading really slow, like concerningly slow for a CD. In fact, even throughout the setup, it was taking forever when it had to actually do anything with the CD. When it wasn't, it was pretty fast. I guess that's just my luck with optical drives, it seems. Something else I figured I would point out is that as the system warmed up, the backlight seemed to sort itself out. The screen itself is still pretty dim. It's not that obvious in these shots, but to my eyes, it's still pretty dim. This is an Intel 945 system, so it doesn't have any built-in drivers, obviously, as this does not have any dedicated graphics either, as hilarious as that would have been on a Core Solo. So it's 945 graphics, and this does have Intel Wireless as well, so both of those things are fine to me, really. Something else I observed while installing drivers, but really just in general, is that the cooling fan was surprisingly loud for such a terrible CPU, so this might need a repaste at some point. Fortunately, drivers installed just fine. This came with XP, so that's not really that surprising. And everything seems to work just fine. Wireless card installed, keyboard and touchpad work. I installed Nero on this system to test that optical drive. I also decided to test that battery to see how long it actually lasted. And the answer is not very long. It lasted maybe 10 minutes before it triggered the low battery alert. Frankly, it's better than nothing. It at least holds the CMOS data still, so if this thing loses power, it's not completely screwed. But yeah, in actual use, it's not that impressive. But overall, everything works about as well as I expected it. However, there were a couple changes I made since I had that DV4000. Particularly, I stole its optical drive, which was a DVD-RW drive, and the memory out of it since it had a 2GB stick. I also tried taking its keyboard because it's exactly the same layout but with a lot less wear. But when I tried it in the new machine, it didn't work because HP are buttheads. I also pulled out a DV8000 because it had a couple more things I could steal, primarily the optical drive bezel and a hard drive caddy, both of which fit into the DV5000 perfectly. So the last thing I really need to get is a hard drive cover. I also found an identical 2GB stick to upgrade this to 4 gigs of RAM in total. And instead of using that XP install, since it was just primarily for testing, I decided to migrate the Windows install from that DV4000 to this computer, which just so happens to be Windows Vista. Actually, this is technically Windows 2007 that originated from the DV8000, but this is a whole mess I don't even really want to get into in this video. This system did also have Windows Vista drivers. It would have been a pretty new device when Vista came out, and it does work fine despite the pretty low-end CPU. The RAM upgrade definitely helps this thing a lot, and because it uses 945 graphics compared to 915 in the Pentium M devices, this does have Windows Aero, which runs pretty well on this. Otherwise, that's about all I have to say about this thing. It's pretty basic. That was kind of the point. So I think it's time to adventure into the unknown. The DV6000 is a model I'm not familiar of. I've never had one before, and I've heard pretty bad things about them, but this one seemed to be in pretty good shape other than a couple minor scuffs on the lid. It also has pretty much all of its parts still in it, including the original 12-cell battery. Otherwise, I don't know what hardware is in this because all the stickers are gone and the original owner didn't know either. And I could Google the model number. This is a DV6985SE, but well, that's no fun. So I decided to just plug it in, and well, it took a little while, but it actually still works, which I was a bit surprised about. I realized straight away that it's likely because this is a model with a Core 2 Duo rather than an AMD CPU. The Intel units, as far as I'm aware, usually have a better chance at staying alive than the AMD ones. Specifically, this is a T5750, not particularly impressive. It also has 4 gigs of RAM. The CMOS battery was dead on it, which isn't surprising. And it still had an install of Windows 7 on it, which was not upgraded from the original install. This was a clean install. It wasn't particularly quick, and when it booted to the desktop, it had a lot of personal information on here. Despite not having a lot of software, it had a couple internet browsers, as well as Microsoft Office 2016 and Skype, and a few other things like Adobe Acrobat. There isn't a lot that's interesting here otherwise, so I'm not showing any of it, but as far as I'm aware, the last time this was used was 2018, so this thing has clearly lived a good life. But yeah, that install has gotta go. As soon as I got Windows set up, I did a little bit more snooping. I discovered that hard drive is 250 gigabytes, which was the original capacity when it was new, and it appears to have around 8,000 hours on it, and it's still in good health. I also checked thermals, which were surprisingly good. I have a feeling it's because this system only has Intel 965 graphics rather than a dedicated NVIDIA GPU. So that and the Intel CPU is likely why this thing is still alive after all this time. I also tested the optical drive, but I wasn't nearly as worried about this one as I was with the other machine. I did find that the hard drive and optical drives were dated 2008, so they're likely both original to the system, and this was likely one of the last DV6000s before it was replaced with a newer model. I also found that the hard drive has a proprietary connector on it, so I'm glad I got it with the system. Now, while I could have set this Windows install up and it would have probably been fine, because it was a little bit bland, I started looking on the Internet Archive to see if I could find any media for this PC. The DV6000 is one of those devices that was built in the Vista transition period, so some of the earliest DV6000s did actually come with Windows XP, but this one obviously came with Vista, so I could have gone either way. But since this model, according to HP, is actually a DV6700, the only thing that I could find that was the most convenient was the recovery partition from one of these. There were two caveats though, first being that it was in Greek, which I have nothing against, but it's not my native language, and the second being that it's a Norton Ghost image. So I connected the hard drive to a different PC, made an ISO containing the Ghost image so that I could copy it to a virtual hard disk in a virtual machine using Hiren's boot CD, which I could then use to open Norton Ghost, because I don't have any burnable CDs left and the modern version doesn't have this for some reason, and use that to restore the recovery image to the hard drive in this thing. And then made a backup of that with my preferred backup program in case I have to restore it later. And it works perfectly. Obviously it's all in Greek, but fortunately I've used this program before, so I have a basic enough understanding of where each button is, and it's not that complicated anyway. This image is for Windows Vista Home Premium. Not sure if I'll keep that on here, but at least it gives me something to explore on the system. Fortunately for me, the fact the recovery was in Greek didn't really matter, because it turns out this has an option to set it to English as well, and this changes the entire operating system and even the recovery partition to be entirely English, which is actually kind of neat. On first boot it wasn't fast, but it turns out it had to install some more stuff, so I guess that explains it. A lot of this is pretty similar to the Slimline S3300F that I covered last year, but this time this doesn't have any old registration information left in it, so I'll take that. This media covered the system pretty much perfectly, except for the Wi-Fi and graphics, both of which are Intel on this. I did some snooping and found out this media is meant for a system with an NVIDIA GPU and Broadcom wireless. There isn't really a lot to this media otherwise. There's a lot less bloatware than you might expect. Part of that could be because it was international media. I don't know, but I'm going to cover that probably in a separate video. I'll probably be covering at least the DV6000 in a follow-up video. Whether I'll do the DV5000, I don't know. Probably eventually. Still, I was expecting one of these to work. I didn't expect for both of them to work, and well, they pretty much have no issues other than a couple minor ones that I was able to sort out on my own. They'll both need to be repasted, but I'm not expecting either of them to be particularly easy to take apart, so I'm saving that task for another day.